So, after many grim aeons, Terminus returns with an interview. The death metal guy couldn't make it today. He's wrestling alligators. I am the black metal guy, and I am here with very special guest, Alan Averill of Primordial, Dread Sovereign, Blood Revolt, and now Verminous Serpent, which is the immediate subject of this interview, although I'm sure we'll get onto all sorts of other subjects. Alan, you're in the studio recording the next Primordial now, right?
Yeah, I was, until last week. So at the moment it's just being, well, mastered actually. The mixing was last week, so this is the finalization of the artwork, the final master, trying to scrabble together stuff for bonus material and, you know, that kind of thing. The final little nails in the coffin, so to speak. So yeah, album number 10 is sort of in the bag.
Very cool. Yeah, I want to come back to some questions about the recording for that soon. I mean, right now, so yeah, mixing, it's out of your hands at this point, right? Or do you still have a hand in the mixing process?
Oh no, I'm generally pretty hands-on with most of the things that I do. It's a little bit different with Primordial because Primordial is like four grumpy old tyrants all jostling for position, all. There's a bit more compromise than, say, with Dread Sovereign, which is, I'm pretty much mixing that together with the engineer. I'm still very much involved in the tone and the sound and a little bit of this, a little bit of that, the other thing. But there's that moment where you just have to trust somebody else's, a little bit of their judgment. But generally, yeah, I'm fairly involved in every aspect of it, whether it's, for example, with the artwork, it's, I've been taking the photos for the artwork and sourcing images and ideas and that kind of thing. So I'm usually quite involved in every part of the process in everything that I make.
Okay, cool. So we're already talking about that, so we might as well just roll on the Primordial recording for a little bit. So you have what sort of inspiration are you drawing on for the art now? Or which ties into a broader question I was going to ask, which is, where do you hear this Primordial record going in relation to the last few? What sets it apart? What's the mood you're going for? If you don't mind revealing that at this stage, or the kind of images and ideas you're drawing on.
No, I don't mind. I'm going to have to talk about it enough times, but why not? You've got to start somewhere, right? Yeah, what happened really was that Primordial did nothing during lockdown. Absolutely nothing. Dublin was, not just Dublin, Ireland was, rather severely locked down. We decided to just put everything on ice. We don't write remotely. We don't trade riffs. We don't do that kind of thing. So realistically, when people began to say to us, hey, it's 5 years since the last album, for us it's realistically 2.5 years. But we got into, I suppose, what you would call the hurry up offense or something like this about 4 or 5 months ago. It's your American football reference for you. And we just sort of sat down and said, right, we've got to go for it. We've got to trust in ourselves. We've got to start, really accelerating the writing process, started moving things along because, if you don't have a deadline to work towards, you can kind of list a bit aimlessly. But no, we just decided that, all right, we're going to start doing this in March. And last November, I guess we started really in earnest, trying to put songs together with some ideas. Right now it has 10 songs, which is longer and more than most Primordial albums. It's got its dark, gloomy stuff. But I think the overall tone is pretty defiant, a bit more epic heavy metal. There's some old school black metal style moments like the first album, that kind of thing. I think it's a very strong record. Yeah. So we're very happy with it. The artwork and stuff, I can't really say too much about the artwork, but I think it's going to be very interesting because we're moving in completely the opposite direction of where I think an awful lot of heavy metal has been going the last while. It's very difficult to make something that's what you would call iconic anymore. When you think back to the brilliant album covers of the 70s and the 80s, which was more virgin territory. So we're trying to reach back into, I suppose, maybe something that looks a bit more very simplistic, a bit more striking and less fussy than most modern stuff. But yeah, it's 6 months ago. There was kind of nothing on the page, and now we're just about to, dot the T's and dot the I's and sign it away.
Well, sounds like a great direction. So a couple of questions about that. How does writing at the faster pace, right? You've had, at various points, you've had much longer times to write records. How does writing at the faster pace affect the songs and feed into the energy?
I think it's good. I mean, we're not a band who makes, dozens of demos of every song and takes labors ages over everything. I think that heavy metal in its traditional form, the blueprint of what we knew and loved as old school heavy metal, I don't think it second guessed itself too much. I mean, I think it kind of, bands rehearsed a lot, okay, but we rehearsed a lot in the writing of this. Sometimes you have to get to a point where, as a musician, you have to trust in your instinct. And I think this is very much an instinctual album. It was quite calm to make, but very pressurized. And I think that some people really enjoy that environment. I do. Kieran, who plays the guitar, does. I'll have the singing done and dusted in 2 days mainly. Sometimes one song just is one take. I don't fuck around. I don't see the point. I'm not interested in. It's kind of more of a snapshot. It's more instant, I find. Some people like to spend ages working on things, months and months and months, altering small things, but I don't. It's not my style. I think that if Black Sabbath can make an album in 3 fucking days, then you should try and trust in your instinct. And we don't do any, like I said, file trading. There's no tempo maps. There's no click tracks. There's nothing like that. It's very much a sort of instinctual process.
Very cool. Yeah, I think there is far too much of the click track and the file swap and the bands with remote members or just one guy cutting and pasting in Pro Tools or whatever these days. So it's good to hear that kind of shoot from the hip approach. I've got some. Yeah, as far as the direction, I think a lot of our listeners, I mean, we have obviously a lot of black metal fans and a lot of people, increasingly more death metal people, and a lot of things we've been covering lately have had a epic heavy metal flavor. There's been a real revival in that stuff. So what, as far as epic heavy metal, what would be some core reference points for you? I seem to remember Primordial had played some shows with Solstice back in the day.
Mm-hmm. Wow, Solstice. Yeah, of course. We played with Solstice in 96. When we made our second album, Journey's End, we stayed in the old Solstice house. We had no money going to make the record and nowhere to stay. We actually had no drums and no amps either, and Solstice gave us their backline. So, yeah, I mean, I have only, what can we say, great memories of Solstice. I know they can be a divisive name for some people, but I don't care about that stuff. Back in the day, they were very good to us, and without them, I don't think Journey's End could have been made. And they were also an incredible band. New Dark Age is a fucking milestone of a record, and also the last few, I Am the Hunter and all that kind of stuff. Or what's that called? Death's Crown is Victory. This is a great EP. So, for us, the epic Primordial is the epic Primordial. It's the same well of influences, I suppose, for that style we've been drawing on since we started the band. So for the epic stuff, you're talking about, I suppose, the bigger period of Bathory. There is, our traditional metal upbringing comes out in our influences as well. They're just kind of quite all over the place. As in, you'll hear Irish traditional guitar playing styles in there and 6/8 timings and stuff. But yeah, I mean, you know, you're still talking Candlemass, Black Sabbath, Bathory. Those are the epic metal parts. And, you know, there's of course that, you know, 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6 6, that primordial churn, that 6/8 churn, that, you know, you'll hear in Thin Lizzy Emerald or something, with that element of traditional music. But, you know, we still wear our heavy metal on our sleeves, so to speak. So there's quite a lot of quite aggressive, clean singing going on. There's of course still some dissonant, dark black metal elements, but I think it's got quite a round, rich, bottom-endy, hard tone to it. So, yeah, I mean, look, Primordial, epic. Primordial is epic. Primordial, on album number 10, you're not really going to be introducing, you know, too many new elements to it. Primordial is what it is, you know. But certainly, I think that it's, how we say, it will be epic heavy metal without being, I suppose, 80s trad style epic metal, in that it's got a sort of very dark, tragic, yet uplifting element to it. Like, because it's serious as fuck. We're not playing with, you know, what could you say? We're not playing with things that don't exist. We're not playing with fantasy. Primordial is based very much in a very grim, dark reality. And so it's, at the same time, got that pained, tragic, sort of rebellious, but genuinely rebellious, underpinning to all of its, you know, aesthetic and emotion and all of that stuff. But it's dark. It's dark as fuck.
Yeah, that certainly fitting to the times. And I think a point a lot of people miss about, well, what is it? What's the line in the Manila Road song? It's not just fantasy. Even with Manila Road, which people think of as, you know, fantasy metal, right? The whole point was it was about real life and the epic and mythic undertone of real life for those with eyes to see it, and the grim darkness of real life. Even back in the 80s, which was a different time, obviously. But yeah, something we talk about a lot on the show is the idea that heavy metal can be, how do you do heavy metal as extreme metal, right? Because obviously black and death metal were written in very different ways from heavy metal in the 90s. But how do you do heavy metal in an extreme way? And I think, yeah, hearing the Primordial, I can hear that throughout Primordial sound. Hearing your take on it on this record is going to be interesting. Solstice is also a band that exemplifies that. Heavy metal, but with all the seriousness and conviction of black metal. I don't know, yeah, so you were also talking about that 6/8 churn. And I love that you mentioned Emerald, because when we've tried to come up with an origin for that sort of folky, sort of Celtic warrior sound, that's always what we come back to. It's a great track. It's really ahead of its time. There was an episode, we did an episode a while back where we reviewed a very weird outlier album by an awesome Australian band called Semaine, a record called Indomitus, which is very deeply Celtic sounding.
Yeah,
do you know Semaine?
I knew that guy, actually. I met him here in Dublin. Yeah, I remember him.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a great record. The lyrics read like they're just out of the Tane or something. It's just batshit in the best way. But so I was trying to figure out a genealogy of that kind of sound, right? And there's this. I'd be interested to know what you were listening to when you guys were developing that sound. Obviously, Bathory, but like at the same time, roughly, right? There's Semaine, maybe just a little bit after you. Graveland, there's Hades in Norway, right? A little bit before.
Yeah, you have. Yeah, well, but what you're talking about is actually genuine pagan metal before it turned into furry-booted power metal. Yeah, what you're talking about is the first origins of pagan black metal, which is sort of early 90s. So, I mean, you can include Enslaved in that. You're talking about, yeah, you mentioned Graveland, Einherjar, Hades, yeah, who then became Hades Almighty. There was Negura Bunjit from, Romania. There was quite a few bands at that early 90s thing. Of course, In the Woods are a great example. There was quite a few bands who were not typical orthodox or religious or satanic black metal kind of stuff, even though we had one of our feet in obviously within the black metal camp. I think the pagan black metal origins obviously are, you can probably say Bloodfire Death is the moment where Bathory went from Under the Sign of the Black Mark stuff. And then you can see in Bloodfire Death it began to get a little bit more, obsessed with elements of his own, Viking culture and all that kind of stuff. So that's 1988. I suppose Sabbat from England is a big, big influence because all three of Primordial, who are still there, we all saw Sabbat in 1989 in Dublin. And Sabbat was the first band that we saw who wore like leather gauntlets and had like, kind of black eyelinery Tom G type stuff and sort of leather outfits. And I remember seeing like, oh, that's, I don't want to be a jeans and t-shirt, DRI shirt guy. It was quite inspiring. And then Skyclad, of course, in the early 90s was the first, I think, to really put folk metal and, together. But the black metal bands came from a sort of different angle at it. I don't think many of the black metal bands in 91 or 92 were really thinking about, as you said, 6/8. The 6/8 for Primordial comes from realistically Kieran being very into Irish traditional music, and that's just a timing phrase: 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6. Yeah, no, 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 no. Or what Sons of the Morkan or something. 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6. So that's just what he brought from Irish traditional music, and we mixed it then with Bathory, and Candlemas and Sabbath and stuff. But I don't think many of the other black metal bands were trying to do that. Cruachan from Ireland were pretty much in the beginning of the whole thing as well. But we didn't want to be overtly folky or Irishy. And we sort of have moments here and there, but we didn't want to have violin or flutes or any of that kind of stuff. We wanted it to be, I suppose, a bit more straightforward rock in its, drums, bass, vocals, guitar type thing. We didn't want to rely on an external other instrument to bring the atmosphere, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, there was a whole bunch of bands in the early 90s who were, pushing slightly in a different direction to where most of black metal was going. I think In the Woods is a great example, and we would have considered them as great peers of ours back in the day. Enslaved, of course, our great friends who are still going. And yeah, you mentioned Hades. Einherjar as well. So there are all those 92 to 95 generation bands. There's a few others I'd have to scrape my memory. A few other ones I'd have to really think about. But yeah, that's kind of, I think that's sort of where it comes from. If you want to know where the trad influence come from, I think you've got to, if you go back to the early Tin Lizzy albums, the early 70s one, you'll find Irish trad. They were a bit more of a sort of, they weren't the hard rock band or, proto heavy metal band that we'd come to love by the mid 70s, but early 70s there was a bit more sort of Celtic mysticism about them. But you've got Rory Gallagher as well putting in some trad moments into his blues. But yeah, I mean, Lizzy were doing the twin guitar, I guess a little bit around the same time as Priest, maybe 73, 74 started doing it, because the first few Lizzy only have one. I think Eric Bell is just there on his own. So I would say Lizzy's fourth album is the first to feature twin guitar. So that must be 73 or 74. So Lizzy fans will be shouting at me. But, you can... Black Rose is a good example of a song on Roisin Dove, Anyway, I digress. But it's a mixture of those kind of things. As for other folk, or let's say other pagan metal bands, they would have taken something from their, original, where they were from, so to speak. Swedish and Norwegian bands, I suppose, would have taken something from their own traditional music. It's just that Irish traditional music has a very big imprint on the world. I mean, the Chieftains have probably sold 20 or 30 million records. And so everybody knows the imprint of Irish traditional music, I think, a bit more than most other people. And that's probably because of St. Patrick's Day and a whole bunch of other things. But anyway, there you go. Long answer.
Yeah, no, great answer. That's a really good map for people who are familiar with some of these bands and looking to find others. And I think we focus very much on like contemporary underground stuff, right? And that all has its own its weird autistic canon, right? So like people might be listening to Hades or something or Semaine more than they might be listening to a famous band like In the Woods or something, right? I've always associated In the Woods with proggy black stuff, but like apparently I'm going to have to go back and re-listen to that, right?
Yeah, the demo Isle of Men is pretty much black metal. I mean, don't forget at the same time, you've got the Spectre of Burzum by album, by Philosophem and Hivis Licit Taros. I suppose realistically that's kind of pagan black metal as well. Maybe not the first two, but In the Woods Isle of Men is, I think the demo was 93, which is the same year as our first demo. So, yeah, I mean, they had black metal vocals as well on the first album. So I think people should, have a listen to Heart of the Ages, most definitely.
Yeah, and Einherjar, too, I didn't realize was, that old, or I think I thought of it as like some sort of folk metal band. I'm going to have to revisit that. It's a great map for people you made.
Yeah, I mean, they had their demo, I think, was called Aurora Borealis. And it's the same, I think it might be 94, 93. Yeah, I mean, we're all enslaved as well. I mean, Frost, Horden's Land, they're drawing on, pagan influences as well. There's a bunch of bands really when you look around,
And would you say you were sort of generally in touch with and tuned into what all these bands were doing at around that time, or is it you were developing your
absolutely. No, of course. We were part of, I started my first fanzine in the end of 89. So I was writing with, all the bands I'm talking about, I probably wrote letters to at some stage between 91 and 94. I was doing fanzines and tape trading, and I was super involved in the underground in those times. I did like 5-6 fanzines between 90 and 96. Just letters arriving every day from all over the world. And it was an amazing, magical time to be part of the underground, pre-internet, letter writing, tape trading, getting stuff every week. We were totally aware of everything that was going on. And me and Kieran, wrote letters to people. And, we were influenced by the scene as a whole, the energy of the scene. That you would, one day you'd get a tape you'd get a package and it'd be somebody from Mexico or Colombia writing to you. Or you'd be getting somebody from Israel or Poland or something. There's more, pagan black metal bands that I'd have to dredge my memory, and you'd go, oh, what about, I don't know, Velez or Tumulus or something like this, and I go, oh yeah, of course, those bands as well. But anyway, we were in the black metal scene, but we just had our own, I suppose, cultural sort of historical slant on it that was a bit different from the usual religious black metal.
Yeah, I feel like the Celts and the Eastern Europeans really converged on certain drone ideas, textured drone and triplet guitar stuff. Right.
Yeah, I would say you're probably right. I mean, but it's all primitive stuff. You won't really find, I think, much pagan metal from that era from Spain or Italy or Portugal or Greece. It seems to be a cold country thing. But
cold countries, hard liquor, availability of potatoes, depression. What else? Another early influence thing, which I think we could link. This might be a good segue if you want to get into more Verminous Serpent stuff. Which we might link Primordial to Verminous Serpent and be important for your work in general. My co-host was interested. Well, he was interested in Skyclad, so you've already mentioned them, right? And Sabbath. That connection is really interesting to know. But another thing like that, was the question of whether you felt yourself to be coming. Your relationship to, say, the Peaceville Doom scene, which I know on your show you've talked about as being quite important to you, and it seems like intertwined with the development of Primordial, right? I think you were hanging out with Solstice. You also recorded Journey's End at the Peaceville studio. But we mixed it. We even mixed our first album in Rama. We mixed that at Academy.
We toured in '94 with Anathema. Only 3 gigs or something. We knew my Dying Bride a bit. Well, less so my Dying Bride, but over the years, of course, there's been, these were the sort of Anathema, My Dying Bride, Paradise Lost were the sort of big names within that scene, and we became friends or played with them many times over the 25 years. But Anathema, we would have been, we would have known more than the others. But yeah, that whole scene, that Academy scene, there's so many good bands. There was Chorus of Ruin. There was so many good doom death bands from the UK back then. That it was just a really, off the top of my head, wow, yeah, Chorus of Ruin, Devoid, Hibernoid, Chapel of Rest, Decomposed. Wow, Decomposed first Funeral Obsession EP is a real classic. Corpse as well from Scotland. There was an awful lot of really good, very gloomy stuff from England in that early 90s period. That seemed to just rule the roost, and more so than death metal or other stuff. But yeah, there was a really interesting scene, and I think it was born out of people who grew up in the 80s in sort of hard towns, in sort of working class places, sort of poor places, certainly like Dublin was, and in playing music was not just a reaction to that, to give you something to take you out of all that, but you will find with most Irish bands from that stage, we weren't playing aggressive, fast, aggressive, frenetic. There was no black thrash bands from Ireland in '93 or '4. You've got Morning Beloved and stuff, but an awful lot of it was quite gloomy, earthy, sodden, wet, miserable kind of music, and that sort of betrays the Irish spirit at heart. I think is one of a sort of hard earthborn tragedy or something like this. It's the nature of the history and our relationship to all of that, and as people. And so I think the north of England and Ireland are very, 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 very intertwined and interlinked through migration and poverty and being, I suppose, coming from working class roots. So yeah, there you go. That's for sure.
Okay, that's, yeah. So it's interesting what you said about that being the specific kind of Irish and maybe just British in general, especially Irish and Northern English affect.
Yeah. There was no fucking party music here. You know what I mean? In '93,
right.
It was all quite dark. I mean, there was no power metal bands. There was no trad metal double pedal band with mustache and cheekbones and little guys with high tech boots. There was no Swedish musical rock style bands. It was all, and still is to this day, mainly quite dark, gloomy music. if you were to go to, there's a festival here called the Siege of Limerick, and you go and you look through most of the bands. There's an element of that you'll find with most of the bands who play, I think, And every time somebody tells me, I'm sure there are Irish bands who are, got a bit of therapy and Megadeth and playing sort of, teenage thrash metal, whatever. Of course there are. But the predominant tone that we've set musically for the last 20, 30 years in extreme music has been a bit sort of grief-stricken and gloomy and dark and brooding. And I think that just reflects not only the people, but our relationship to our culture, our history, all that kind of stuff. It affects where you're from. We don't sound hot, so to speak. You go to Colombia or Mexico or Greece, the bands sound like they're from a hot country. You listen to Varathron or Old Rotting Christ. It's a hot sound. It hasn't got that coldness to it. So definitely geography plays a big part, I think, in all these things.
And the coldness of the coldness of the British bands is quite different from the coldness of the Norwegian bands, which is, nocturnal wind, Odinic force.
Well, yeah, I think with the English bands, if you look at Paradise Lost Gothic, which more or less invented an entire genre with this solo lead guitar singing out over these super down-tuned, gloomy rhythms. This is a different kind of darkness than, black metal kind of stuff. Bands like which generally were, obviously there's a speed element, but black metal, I suppose, for the most part, was much more dissonant and stuff. It's a different kind of gloom, all right. Yeah, that's for sure. And I think Irish bands were more like the Yorkshire gloom,
Yeah, so would you say that maybe one thing that we've wondered about is, do you think it would be fair to say that this sort of doom sound you're talking about, not just Peaceville, but this general sort of down-tempo, earthy, hard, working-class gloom, do you think that's maybe the British analog to the second wave black metal stuff? Because one question people have always had is like, why weren't there more, given the histories of these countries and blah, 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 why weren't there more great sort of black metal bands out of either England or Ireland in the early 90s?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. I mean, don't forget there was also, apart from Sabbat and maybe Deathwish and Onslaught, there was no good English thrash either. But having said that, if you think about it, there's not really any good Norwegian thrash metal from the 80s. There's not really any good Norwegian doom metal, with a few exceptions, where Sweden kind of has it all. But yeah, I mean, look, a band from Sweden in 93 or 4 were probably not laying claim to the same working class miserableism that came from Yorkshire in 1992. Bradford is a whole other level of miserable. And, if you've been in Stockholm and been in Bradford, you understand why one sound comes from one place. So yeah, it's a different kind of thing. But the gloomy, doom-filled sort of grief of those old records, like listen to Symphonaire by My Dying Bride. This is dark stuff, and I think probably darker than Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism. It's got a sort of gothic horror to it that maybe only can exist if you know a bit more about English history and when you travel this desolate English countryside, especially the moors and stuff around this area, and you ruined Gothic castles and all this stuff. It's not stuff you really see if you're mooching around in Norway. So there's a historical context. Same with Cradle of Filth. If you look at the lyrics and the things they were influenced by and the writers, there's a sort of old Victorian Gothic, I suppose, aesthetic to it, which bands like Forest of Stars and Fen pick up on now. There is a sort of historical context. And then the Irish version, I suppose, is a bit more agricultural. It's a bit more primitive. We don't have the fine, I suppose, medieval history in the same way. But so much of it is, I think it is a sort of cultural internalized grief and tragedy of a nation's history, which of course is very different if you're from Ireland than from England. But yeah, I mean, Liverpool was just full of working class Irish migrants. And so when we hung out with Anathema the first time in '94, we instantly got along with them because they just felt like they were just like us, exactly like us. Whereas I'm not sure we would have felt a bunch of teenagers from Stockholm were quite the same. But I'm sure they were, because we all ultimately were involved in the underground scene and tape trading and. So that's what bound us together. But we felt a particular kinship with that kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah. Anyway. So that's one thing I was wondering was like, so was the doom? So you felt more connected to this, British doom scene. Do you?
Well, I mean, let's say this. We played with those bands and met them in 1991, 2, 3, 4. So we weren't meeting Immortal or Mayhem or something like this. We didn't meet some of those bands till 97, 98. But not many bands came to Ireland. So we would, we did a little tour with Anathema in early 94. We met My Dying Bride. You'd seen Paradise Lost. We hung out with Decomposed, Chapel of Rest that played here. So nobody was coming here in 93, 94, but English bands who might take the ferry across. So that's probably why. But I mean, musically, Primordial probably has elements of that scene, but also has something in common with the Scandinavian black metal bands, because we were also inspired by Bathory,
right,
and Celtic Frost, and we had our demo was probably more black metal than, Yorkshire Doom. Although, having said that, you look at the start of Among the Lazari and To the Ends of the Earth, and there's and Darkest Flame. There's Doom in there as well. There's always been Doom in Primordial. I suppose this is the influence. This is just the mighty Sabbath weighing over everything, I guess.
Yeah. So there wasn't was there a tribalistic hostility between these scenes in the early, I know the black metal people could be very, intensely line drawing, right? Which was...
Yeah, I mean, I was a total black metal guy. Absolute. I mean, obviously I liked other things and all the bands were talking about, I liked them as well. But fundamentally, I was a sort of a black metal upstart. So, yeah, I know what you're talking about, but go on.
Oh, I was just wondering, so, there was, I was, even the Norwegians, right, they had we hate the Swedish posers, right? Was there a sort of tension between, say, the black metal side of your correspondents and friends and the more, Peaceville thing, right? Because by the
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. I mean, say, one of my oldest and best mates in that scene back then was Duncan, who used to be in Anathema, the old bass player. And, Anathema would just come over in the van with their gear and play, and we'd all just hang out. And the first time we met, we're both just wearing the same Celtic Frost t-shirt somewhere around 93. And... but back then Anathema were wearing fucking spiked armbands and bullet belts and bit of black eyeliner and stuff. I mean, they were kind of doing pretty much what we were doing, for the Crestfallen and stuff. So yeah, I mean, no, there wasn't really. I mean, obviously when it's 1993, so you are a dickhead, black metaler who's has everything, making a name for yourself, being a bit of a, spiky sort of asshole now and again. But no, not really. I think that we weren't really like that. I think it was different if you were in whatever the cultural zeitgeist of that Norwegian, Swedish, Finnish thing. I mean, they all had land borders with each other, and there was the media attention looking at them in 93, all that kind of stuff. No, not really. I mean, of course, back then, there was always the kind of, you as a black metal dude or a black metal band, you were at odds with elements of your own scene, who you felt didn't take things seriously enough for. But hey, look, you're 18. What do you expect?
For sure. Okay, well, you heard it from Alan, guys. The UK extreme doom is the British black metal scene. And yeah.
Yeah, well, don't forget, you did have bands like Dust Defiled, Cradle of Filth. There was quite a few English black metal bands back then. And of course,
Hecate is good, right? Hecate Enthroned.
Oh, Hecate Enthroned, yeah. We did a tour with them in Psy of the UK in 94, actually. Yeah, Hecate Enthroned. I remember those guys. Actually, still no Dill, the bass player, still after all these years, we met somewhere, I think in Norway, and we hadn't seen each other in like 25 years or something since we played together, 23 or 4 years or something. Still going strong, yeah, still doing his thing. So, yeah, there was a bunch of other bands. Dead Christ as well, Necrosanct, I think, or maybe they were more death metal. But you know, if you want to know something about UK black metal, go back and check out Hell, and check out their 7-inch from like 84 or something, 85, and also the first Sabbat demos. If anybody wants to listen to Sabbat, Fragments of a Faith Forgotten, and Magic Theory and Practice, the demos from 86, they sound like fucking black metal. And Hell before that, you know, and of course, don't forget, it's not far from English black, you know, from this stuff to step into Witchfind, Angel Witch, of course, Venom, and all the great new wave British heavy metal stuff. But you've got a lot of occult tinge stuff. Look at Pagan Altar, you know. Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling now.
No, that's great. That's the sort of stuff that people want. Like, it's I had not even thought about connecting Hell to that, but yeah, no, that makes sense. You approach this stuff. I think when we work our way backwards, we gravitate towards the full lengths or maybe the major EPs, and the demos are interesting. But for you, who were there at the time, you were paying a ton of attention to the demos and the EPs. You put me onto the Anathema demos and EPs, which I like better than the recordings, and which are very black metal in some ways, you know? So
absolutely. And there's tons of other bands. I mean, like I said, check out Decomposed, The Funeral Obsession, Chorus of Ruins, Swan Dive. There's so many bands. Seven Church used to be cool, although I'm not sure how the vocals stand up now. There was so many good bands from back in that period, especially, yeah. I mean, the Anathema Tours of Sinister, I think, is the demo. Anathema were like 14 and 15 when they made that first demo. They were called Pagan Angel before that. So there was loads of great bands out there. Anyway, yeah, go on.
All right, cool. Well, that was very interesting, and so I'm glad we sort of started at the... that was all stuff that I had, like, I really wanted to talk about, but was like, maybe we'll get to it. So we started at the end. Now let's go to the beginning. Let's get back to Verminous Serpent. So that project has, even though it's very clearly black metal, it moves at mid-tempo, it lurches, it's got a doom feeling and mood, certainly that bleak, tragic, post-industrial mood that you were talking about, deindustrialized mood. But tell us about the genesis of that project, and maybe how you connected first with Joseph Deegan and Matt Bree, and
sure.
all that.
Yeah, well, I mean, during lockdown, Matt, who I would see quite regularly, he just had this idea. In fact, it came from me playing the guitar and him playing the drums, we're doing like Beherit or something. We had these rehearsal things where we would meet up in secret and have little rehearsal gigs for 10 people. And we were just playing Beherit or something. And then he just sort of had this idea, why don't we do a band like this? And so then he asked Joey, who I've known for 30 years. Joey's mainly Slither and a tattoo artist and a bunch of other bands. And so during lockdown, we just got together and started to write these songs. I mean, the idea, of course, wasn't to make it super fast or anything. I have about 6 reference points, which for me probably were the same reference points I had with Primordial in 91. I'm only interested in the Rotting Christ demo, Satanus Tedium, Master's Hammer, the Mass demo, Varathron, Genesis of Apocryphal Desire demo, Samael Medieval Prophecy demo, Order from Chaos, Stillbirth Machine, Will to Power, kind of 7-inch era, Fallen Angel Doom, Blasphemy, Sarcophago, I, and some old South American stuff, and that's it. It's totally blinkered, totally orthodox, and totally close-minded in every single aspect. So it's just 3 angry guys just getting together and playing this kind of super primitive black death metal. And it was half and half, songs written between all of us. Well, it could be half of 3 of us, but yeah, you know what I mean. And we wrote the songs, we hired a decent studio, and we went in and we played the whole album through twice in one go. That's why you hear all the feedback between the songs. It's all just one fucking go. No overdubs, a bit of guitar, add a few singing. I had to find a different vocal tone, but that's cool. And just find an underground label and put it out there. And Yeah, it's great. It turned out fucking really nasty, brutal, evil stuff. I'm happy because it's something it's like something I would have wanted to make in '91. And so to me, like I said, I can listen to Order from Chaos, Stillbirth Machine or something and listen to it and think, yeah, that's where that's one of the 8 things that I liked that put together to make this Satanus Tedium Feast of the Grand Whore. There's a riff that's like that. That's all I give a shit about. So it's not making any grand statement. There's no huge angle to it. There's no deep cod philosophical nonsense in the lyrics. It's just all dark, angry tone to it. It's got this sort of medieval occultism vibe to the lyrics, but it's not profound, so to speak. It's to set tones and textures. I wrote a completely different kind of lyrical style, sort of onomatopoeic, I suppose, without sounding pretentious. And the lyrics are written to just be textures of sound with the dissonant consonants and hard tones of the words. But so they don't really grammatically make full sense, which is why they're just written in one huge, big, long sentence on the back of the vinyl.
Cool.
So there's no. People are asking me for. To be honest, like people are asking me questions that I've answered in 1993 about Primordial's demo, and I just go, hey, it's okay. Like, I'm not going to answer this like a 20-year-old with a big, deep, pseudo-philosophical take on the world as you do when you're 18 or 19, and that's okay. But it's just meant to be dark, violent, honest, analog-sounding black death metal, and that's exactly what it is. No less, no more, no big crazy story. Other than that, it was made in secret during lockdown because you weren't even supposed to leave your fucking house. So, and that it's done analog, completely live, which you can hear. So, that's what it is.
So yeah, how does that tie into the writing? So as we heard it, it's really, one of your patrons is also a patron of our show. So he mentioned something about the all the way through recording, which sounded very cool. You could definitely hear that. That makes sense. When it seemed to us like the songs came out of improvisation or jamming at some point. Was there improvisation? How did you write the songs? And was there any improv on the recordings?
Yeah, well, there's tons of mistakes. I mean, I'm playing the bass, so I didn't overdub a single piece of bass, so it's full of mistakes. I don't give a shit about that stuff, really. I would sit. The day before we had the first rehearsal, I was sitting with my guitar and I thought I better fucking come up with something or else we're just going to stand looking at each other in the room like idiots. So I wrote the first song that we did and we played it. It sounded cool. It was cool energy. Joey wrote, I think we wrote like 2.5 each. My ones are the sort of knuckle draggers, the sort of slightly more simplistic ones, but you write your riff at home, but you jam it in the room. Yeah, and I mean, there's the last song, the last few minutes of it are just kind of wild. It's just sort of okay. Let's see what happens and whatever you play next. And even with Dread Sovereign, I never play the same song twice, the same way. Never ever. I really like things to be just kind of, especially sort of reckless and wild, and just a bit. That venom kind of spirit of it just being a little bit hell for leather, like just on the edge of chaos. So that's what I like. So that's exactly what it is. And so I'm very proud of it, very happy with it. Hopefully we get to play some gigs, I guess, so it's like something I would have made in 1991. I would have wanted to have made in 91, and so therefore I'm really happy that it has 0% evolution or progression, and that I'm very pleased with the fact that it's exactly like I would have wanted to make it in 91, and that nothing has moved on a single inch. That's why it's true black metal.
The origin doesn't change; it's still there ahead of us.
Yeah, exactly. I have no interest in any of that shit. I'm proud to say my stance on black metal hasn't moved. The dial doesn't move. Hasn't ever moved. since like 92 or 91. I'm exactly the same in my principles of that. I just happen to be older. And so it never should move. It shouldn't progress or evolve or go anywhere. If you wanted to, and you want to put a prefix in front of it and call it post-black metal, that's up to you. But in its purest form, it never changes. It's just a sort of, some sort of ethereal essence. And that's just how it is. So, that was kind of like a vague answer I would have given in 1993, but whatever.
That's good, and I think it's good to believe in what you do. I mean, isn't it? It's so weird that we get told that having serious conviction about this music is somehow uncool or immature.
I don't give a fuck. Like, my point is, I mean, I've been around long enough that I don't have anything to prove to anybody. So if I say, this is my view on black metal and you're 19 and disagree, I don't give a shit about that. I'm not interested in your opinion. It's if you've been around at the beginning and the middle and the end of it or whatever, it's not, you can't intellectualize a punch in the face, so to speak. And that's Verminous Serpent is just not meant to be over-intellectualized. It's just a primal, primitive thing. It's three angry men making this kind of noise in an honest way in a room together. I'm not going to dress it up in, like I said, tell you about, well, the Rosicrucians were this deep, this hermetic society, and this is all the things not really, Okay, they existed in whatever it is, 1700, but, you've got to write lyrics that are inspired by something, of course. You just want this tone, this sort of religious, occult sort of imagery. So that's not faked, but at the same time, I'm not dressing it up in some sort of emotional fantasy story. It's mainly inspired by just dark, negative, angry energy.
Well, there's an abstraction to that, which is in your lyrical approach. It sounds like you tried to write the lyrics more like, it sounds like you tried to write the lyrics more like an instrument, like to use the voice as an instrument and write the lyrics for that. And that's
yeah. I mean, you're trying to. Okay, the lyrics are kind of they have a tone. They're about something. They're about trying to create a to sort of paint some tones to the palette. But they're not like Primordial. They're not meant to be. See, once you've written lyrics for fucking 30 albums. Or 25, 30 albums, you need to find a different voice. I can't be Nemthianga from Primordial in a Verminous Serpent album. That's why there's no singing. It's not, people go, what the fuck is that you singing? The whole point was it has to be different. So it also has to be different lyrically. Same with Blood Revolt had to be different from Primordial. Dread Sovereign has to be different. It has to be different. So the way I approached this one was to almost remove most of the syntax and the grammar and not have it to try and make sense, like make a point. It's kind of just a kind of more tonal, as I said, onomatopoeic approach to the words. They are interesting, and they're dark and they're pretty fucking. They set a sort of medieval religious tone to them, a sort of primitivism, but which is intentional. So I mean, they're not dumb, but at the same time, they're not filled with some deep, dark, hidden meaning that's going to help you uncover some sort of secret.
Well, they're direct, they're focused completely on the feeling, and, sometimes people use the word abstract to mean, like cerebral frou-frou with its head up its ass, but, like, at its best, it means the opposite. It's, like, just the skeleton, just the, you don't need meaning when you just have the thing, right? It's
yeah, I mean it's yeah, it surely does. It's I mean I don't know. It's hard to say that much about it really. I mean it's there's no deep dark secret to it other than it's deep and dark.
All right. Other than that, so okay, we've talked about the improv, we've talked a bit about the lyrics. Where to go now? As far as the vocal approach, we kept thinking of like Le Légion Noir or whatever, the French bands, right? But I assume you're like thinking about Samael.
Yeah. I'm thinking of things like Holocausto from Brazil, Sarcophago, INRI, Old Master's Hammer, first album demos. This very old, obscure kind of Mortuary Drape, maybe at the start of Mortuary Drape. This old, obscure black metal tone. And there's not much, not much high. It's a bit lower. Maybe I'm thinking also of Varathron and a bit of Blasphemy, a bit of Beherit as well, but with a bit more body. Also stuff like, let's say, Incantation is a big influence. I'm a big Incantation fan. Old Immolation. I wanted some fucking, try and channel a bit of Glenn Benton into some of it and some of that old primitive death metal style. It's the vocals are more death metal really, but I just wanted them to be chaotic and haphazard, and they're all more or less done in one take. I don't go back and fix things into or snap them into the rhythm too much. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're repeating random words. They're totally random, So. There's a lot of old death metal in it. I suppose that sort of late 80s, early 90s style, Entrapment of Evil. Incubus as well. Oh, I mentioned that's a huge influence. Incubus, not the Florida Incubus, the pre-Acheron Incubus, God Died on His Knees. So that was a huge influence on everything. That's like my top 5 things for this to be like.
Where was that Incubus from?
They're from. Hang on, just 1 second, and I'll tell you. Incubus is the one with the inverted cross on the front. It is Gore Records, 1987. It's where the fuck were they from though? It was some of the guys who played on Abominations of Desolation, Engulfed in Unspeakable Horror. God Died on His Knees, Reanimator's Mutilations. It's Mike Browning, who's now in Nocturnus. It's sort of pre-Nocturnus Acheron. One of the greatest 7 inches ever.
So this is like pre-Morbid Angel stuff.
No, this is 87, so this would be after. So in 87 would be the same year, I think, as Thy Kingdom Come, Demo Morbid Angel. So it's after he left. Mike played on Abominations of Desolations, and that's the first thing he did after leaving Morbid Angel. And Sterling von Scarborough was the original bass player of Morbid Angel before David Vincent. So, Abominations of Desolations, of course, is another big influence. Those are the things. Oh, whatever 12 things I mentioned, that's all there is. For the other guys, there's maybe some more modern things, Cult de Ghoul, or Perverted Ceremony, or stuff like this. But for me, no, it's purely 1986 to about 1990-91, and that's all it is to it. I don't really give a shit about. That's all there is to Verminous Serpent for me.
So you were not listening to Ride for Revenge, right?
I like Ride for Revenge a lot. Yeah. The other guys, especially Matt, the drummer, he's really, really into Ride for Revenge, and that was one of his. If you were talking to him, he would say that's a reference point. So when there's a riff that I have that, in the first song, there's dong, 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 he's like, great, sounds like Ride for Revenge. To me, I meant it more like Mortuary Drape, but it's, it doesn't matter really. Ride for Revenge, definitely, yeah, they're a killer band. It's not that I don't listen to modern black or death metal, I do. I like lots of modern stuff. It's just my reference points for writing, the things that actually influence me. I'm not a guy whose record collection just stops somewhere in 1994. I have a lot of new stuff. I'm not as much up on everything as I used to be 10 or 15 years ago, but I still keep up on things. I mean, just literally before I came in the door here, I was listening to this band, Daeva, D-A-E-V-A, American Black Thrash. Yeah, it's good. Anyway, but Incubus, God Died on His Knees, is a huge influence. Anyway, that's, again, pretty obscure niche stuff, but there you go.
That's what we want. I mean, a thing people forget, right, is that for people of your generation who were there at the beginning, the black metal people were listening to death metal. That's like a big part of where it came from, I believe.
No, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. I mean, they were the same thing. 7 churches. I mean, you look at, whether it's Show No Mercy or whatever, or let's say 7 churches, Scream Bloody Gore. Of course, we were all listening to death metal. What happened was that somewhere around 1991, death metal started to be less about how great the devil was and more about how we should save the planet, and that just instantly turned a whole bunch of us off. As soon as bands started wearing board shorts and singing about the environment, I was like, no, I don't want this. What I want is axes and blood and guts and spikes and Satan and nails and fuck off, and I wanted the hate.
Once again, fight, pray.